You're not ticklish. It's not fair.
Oh, sorry. Don't go away again. Okay. What is this concerning?
I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, Mr. Owens.
Sharon? She's resting now, so she'll see you at dinner.
Okay.
I'm surprised you came.
Me too.
What happened?
From what I was told, she was in traffic, changing lanes.
I know that. I don't believe it.
What happened when Fiona was here?
She always had to have her way.
Maybe she acted that way when she felt threatened.
How dare you?
See why she hated this place.
Why did you come here? Trying to see what she was hiding from?
Thanks, everybody. Guys, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations on this really moving and powerful film.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk about where it started, because David, you're a producer on the film, so I imagine it came to you quite early, and you helped with the process in getting it made. Is that the case?
Yeah, it started for me when I was at the Sundance Film Festival with a film called Middle of Nowhere. And we had just screened that film. I was in the lobby afterwards, and Maris approached me with a script in her hands. Of course, I was initially mesmerized by the beauty that she is. And then she presented me with this script. And I went to my hotel room, read it, read the first 10 pages, thought that's all I was going to read. And I couldn't put it down. And it was one of those scripts that both terrified and intoxicated me. Anytime I'm looking at material I may be involved with, I'm looking to be scared, and this was something terrifying because grief is not a subject matter that you go, yeah, let's do that. But
it's also something that is not the easiest thing to portray on screen, especially when so little of it is in words. So much of your performance, I feel like here, is captured in what you're doing with your body in several moments of the film, and how you're portraying grief just physically in this character.
Yeah, and that was on the page. I mean, Maris wrote the script, and that was something that I could feel exactly what you say there was going to be required of me. And, I'm married to a wonderful woman myself, and I knew I was going to have to go to places that are not the nicest to go to. But in terms of answering your question about being a producer, I also want to put into the world pieces of work that are not only challenging to me, but also to the audience, and to take you to places that maybe you haven't been before, or to go in a different way. And I was really taken with Maris as a filmmaker, as a new voice, and I really wanted to support that as well.
Take me back to when you approached him in this hall. Did you say it was?
Yeah, it was in the lobby, having had
in this lobby. I feel like it's a sort of filmmaker's dream to sort of run up to an actor and say, "I have this script for you," and then they actually go read it. So how did that work for you?
Absolutely. Well, we also had the added advantage that Ava DuVernay also had said, "Oh, David Maris," so that we had a little cushion in there as well.
Ava DuVernay, man, just making it happen all over the place for everybody here.
She is, yes. But David and I, about a week later, sat down, and we sat down for about 3 hours and really went through the script and talked about it, and talked about kind of emotionally where it came from for me and kind of where we would need to be in the space to actually make the film. And it was an incredible discussion, and David turned to me and said, "Yes, Maris, I'll do the film."
Talk to me about that space that the two of you discussed having to be in to make that film. I mean, if it's a space that is even sort of you're able to articulate, it might just be a sort of an emotional place that you decided on. But can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the first thing that I often talk about with the film is it's a piece of fiction, but I started writing it as my marriage fell apart. So which is very specific and personal and individual. So it's an individual truth. And I was facing similar questions to the character of Sherwin, which is what happens when the ground falls out from under you and when your ideas of your future family and self kind of dissipate in an instant. And then from there, that's kind of an offering so that David knows, oh, that's initially where she was coming from.
Rosie, how did you get involved in the film?
My representatives sent it to me, and I really loved it a lot. I responded to it a bit more gleefully than it was more, my response was like, yes, because I've had, relatives, my father passing, my mother and my aunt who raised me, and grief doesn't really play out the way you usually see it on television. Sometimes you act out very poorly, or sometimes it's just very quiet. It's not overly dramatic. And so I really appreciated that. And then Maris and I met. We had a lunch. It was supposed to be just for drinks. And 2-3 hours later. And then I met with Diane Weiss to see if we had chemistry. We went to the MoMA, and for lunch it was fabulous. And
I imagine any moment with Diane Weiss is fabulous.
Yes, it is. And I remember when she looked at me, during lunch at the MoMA, she just went, and that was it. And so I knew that we connected. And it was very, very easy. Mm-hmm. It was very, very easy.
Talk about, you said that your marriage was ending and you were sort of crafting this piece about starting over, but a lot of what the film is about, and I think Rosie just touched on it, which is the sort of brutality of grieving. So often in movies and in television, we see people sad and then moving forward and moving on, and everyone's there to comfort them, but oftentimes in real life, people don't want to be comforted, or they don't know how to be comforted, or they react very poorly to those that are sort of doing the best that they can with them. And it takes a certain bravery, I think, as a filmmaker and as an actor to allow your characters to be seen in a very negative way when they're in the midst of something that's tragic. Can you talk about writing that and sort of having the bravery to craft that?
Well, I think grief can be very isolating. It's often, particularly in the U.S., an experience that is deemed to needs to take place behind closed doors. And so for me, the film really is about what happens when somebody's feeling the most pain they can imagine, and instead of keeping that door closed, it actually opens. And it's about the transformational potential of empathy. So it's what happens when one character who feels totally devastated actually has to open his eyes to somebody else's pain, and the potential for compassion in that moment.
Someone who they also don't particularly like that much at first.
Or even know that well.
Yeah, I mean, and that was one of the things that also drew me towards it. This African-American man who is building a life with his wife in Atlanta, has had no interaction with his mother-in-law, who is in rural Maine, and suddenly the only thing they have in common is gone, and they are drawn together to deal with something that only they are experiencing, in a sense. So they are completely different, opposite people with one thing in common. And that in and of itself was really intriguing to me, considering that, I also hadn't really seen an African-American man, young man, dealing with a middle-aged white woman in a rural part of America where there are very few black people. It's not something we hammer over the head in the film, but that is more indicative, I think, of the world we live in. So often, you see films that have anything to do with race, and that becomes the central theme. But in our lives, day to day, it's not. It's in the air. It may be something that plays out in very subtle ways, but that was something I was very keen on about the film, is that it's never mentioned, but it's inevitably in the room. But there are bigger things going on, and that, I think, is what plays out in people's lives generally, and more often than we necessarily see in film also.
Absolutely. Was there ever, early on in the script writing process or even in making the film, did you ever find yourself sort of tempted to draw on the racial differences between the characters a little bit more? Because sometimes audiences, different kinds of audiences, can latch on to that a little bit easier. I personally totally appreciated that it was something that was very much in the background, because otherwise we get a kind of cause film, which we see a lot, and usually that is indicative of writers not really sort of knowing how to go deeper. I think sometimes the cause works, but was there ever any temptation on your part to sort of draw on that a little bit more?
No, I mean, that's not, I feel very much in agreement with David. I mean, it's the fabric of the film, not the theme of the film. The themes of the film are about loss and love and relationships, about life.
David, I think you had said that you really wanted Diane Weist for this film, right? How did you guys go about getting her?
Well, we all wanted her. I mean, what's not to want, what's not to like? Those 2 Oscars alone are a pretty good indicator of her prowess as an actress. But we wanted someone who wanted to do it as well, because, in the same way that when Maris approached me, I had to have that moment. And it's, it wasn't for me of, do I want to do this film or not? It's, do I want to go there? Because when you take movie making seriously, when you accept the responsibility that getting to tell stories on this platform involves culturally, you have to engage with the fact that it's going to cost you. And I do films that cost me. They cost me emotionally, they cost me my time, and they cost me a degree of spiritual investment, because I try to throw my all into anything I do. And in whoever was going to be playing Lucinda, we wanted someone who would do the same, in order that what plays out between us feels visceral, feels real, authentic, and something that, whether you've experienced grief or not, you are seeing something play out that feels akin to what human beings engage in when this kind of thing happens. And she is an actress who every take costs her. I mean, it was such an incredible thing to watch. She would at times say, I only have one more of these in me, guys. I hope, is everyone ready? And we need to move on, otherwise she's going to die. It was really incredible to be around her through this process.
She also, I mean, she's one of the best actors working today, but she has this combination of a fragility and ferocity that was really necessary, that is really what I was looking for in that actor.
You talk about the cost that goes into sort of making a film as an actor as well as someone who's participating. I'm curious if the cost that you put into these characters is something that you learned doing this early on, what it took for you to want to be a part of a film or part of a project, if there was some experience early on that you learned, okay, I need to be on things that I want to put everything that I can into. I can't do anything halfway.
I think, for us, it's such a privilege getting to make movies. I don't take it for granted at all. It's a very, very competitive industry, but also the power and the effect movies can have on culture is undeniable. But also some of my favorite actors, someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, for instance, who I completely idolize. When I watch a performance by him, you're not just watching a story, a yarn. You're watching the fabric of humanity emanating from that screen. And that's what I try to do. And I gravitate towards projects that ask that of me, because I genuinely think of it as an art form. I think of it as a form that hopefully you do work that outlives you. I'm not really, and there's room for popcorn movies. I like watching them. I like doing them now and again, but I would much rather go through an experience where I brutalize myself.
I'm curious, how difficult do you find, even after the success of a movie like Selma, which is one that is both, I think, spiritually fulfilling as well as had a lot of mainstream success, how difficult do you find how often do you find the chances to have an experience like Five Nights in Maine? Is it harder to find than you would have imagined after the success of something like Selma?
It is harder to find, but that's why you become a content creator. That's why you find amazing new voices that you can support, and that, you find these hidden gems that otherwise might not get made, and get behind them to make them. Because if you don't do that, then you can't really complain about the dearth of that kind of material. So, I'm very engaged in creating that content, finding like-minded people who want to create that kind of content, engaging with studios to make sure that they create space for that kind of content. So it's about not waiting for it, it's about creating it.
Rosie, you're kind of the warmth of the film at times. I find we have these two people having kind of competing elements of grief, and you're the sort of warm outside who's there for each of them. How did you sort of craft this character and your performance around theirs?
When my father was passing, and specifically my uncle, I remembered the home attendants that were assigned to them, who became part of the family, but they were very respectful of the family space. And I told Maris, I said, my character is a professional at walking on eggshells. And it is not my place as her private nurse to have those eggshells, to hear them cracking, if you will. And so that's how I approached it. There was one day when Maris was like, can you speak up? I go, no. So I purposely spoke in a very, very, very kind of whispery talk. But also what you don't know, when every day I would wake up before I would go to set, I would, David would understand this, I would force myself to cry. So I would cry really, really hard and get it out, take a shower. Okay, now I'm gonna be the professional that walks into the room, who's still very, very empathetic. So even in the scene where with David's character and my character, he keeps asking me what's going on. And I really wanted to burst out crying, but I held it back. I held it back because that's for them. That's not for me. I'm there to comfort, I'm there to heal, I'm there to listen. And so that's how I approached the role, because that home attendant meant so much to my dad. And even at the funeral service, she still played the background, and that just blew my mind.
Well, it's so fascinating, I think, as an actor, and it's a testament to the sort of imagination behind a performance, because you don't necessarily know that this home attendant would cry or is crying, but you imagine that the grief that they deal with personally, and the pain that they deal with personally, is always attended to, off camera in this particular situation, but out of light of those that they're actually physically attending to on a daily basis. And they might not cry, but I think that's so interesting that that's sort of where you had to go to feel comfortable being like this in front of the camera.
Yes, very, very much so. And also another challenge was to balance the personal relationship with Diane's character. Basically, I'm her only human contact. And when she starts to misbehave, it was just with a look, right? Maris was like, just give her a look, like, cool it. And, walking that fine line was really challenging and very interesting, and I really enjoyed that. And so it was great.
Rosie, I have to step away from the movie for just a second. Last week, did we not see you very briefly at the DNC?
Yes, and I apologize to the world for my singing.
Absolutely not. Do not apologize. You were a part of what I think is historically one of the great Democratic conventions we've ever had. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well,
Can you briefly tell us what it was like being there?
Well, initially I was there the day before the convention. I was appointed by the DNC as a vice co-chair of the Credentials Committee. We oversee the seating of the delegates and any unresolved issues prior to the DNC commencing. And so I was very, very tired, but I was so excited to see democracy at work because there were a few issues that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but they were resolved in such a democratic way. You know, and I was supposed to be very serious on the dais, you know, as a vice co-chair. And when the issue was resolved, I threw up my hands in victory. I was like, yeah! And then everyone started clapping, and it was pretty awesome. And being on the floor, especially to see Michelle Obama's speech, I was second row, sitting with New York State. It was magical.
Did you cry?
I cried. I cried everybody was crying. Everyone was crying. You know, I even saw, you know, our elected officials of New York tearing up, and that was pretty special. And I felt that she changed the course of the convention. And Joe Biden and Obama and Mr. Khan and his wife, it was just fantastic, and it gave me a lot of hope in America. It really did, as cheesy as that sounds.
I don't think that sounds cheesy at all. I think that's what the convention did for a lot of us, especially 1 week after that other thing that happened.
Right. Yeah.
that garbage fire that happened for 4 days.
But the song was very magical, as you said. I make light of it, but you know, everyone got to rehearse except me, and then I'm the last one. So you're waiting there. I'm waiting for the mic to be passed, and you're going, oh, they're gonna come to me. They're gonna come to me. Keep smiling. Keep smiling. And I let it go, because it was such a beautiful moment, and I could feel the energy from the audience, and I could feel the energy up on stage with all those wonderful Broadway singers, and we're singing What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love. It just blew my mind, and I didn't care. I just belted it out, and my heart was just in tune, although my voice wasn't. It was really a wonderful moment.
I thought it was a beautiful moment, whether you were in tune or not. I thought it was maybe even more beautiful that it was so sincere and maybe out of tune. I don't want to say it was, but I thought it was really wonderful.
No, I told Mayor de Blasio afterwards, he said, Rosie, you did so well. I said, I sounded like a Puerto Rican Bugs Bunny, Mr. Mayor. Let's get it right. You know, I said, but, you know, it was, yeah, everyone up there, we just let it go. And then when we went backstage, everybody was stunned at what we just did. We were all just stunned and crying and hugging and excited, and it was just beautiful.
I don't want to stick too close to the election news, but David, you also sort of just became a U.S. citizen. Is that true? You're going to be able to vote for the first time in the United States.
That's right. Yes, it's an important time to be able to do that.
I was going to say, what's it like to have your first time voting in the United States in what may be one of the most historic elections of all time?
Well, the truth is, any election, a general election, is historic because history goes on to be written by the next president. To be honest, what happened is you can't play Dr. Martin Luther King in a film about voting rights and not be able to vote. That's a little. Yeah.
I would say that tips your hat a little way to one side of the election.
Yes, there is that as well. But hypocrisy is something I don't want to be accused of. So I thought let's get that done.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on that,
you.
and congratulations on being able to be there, Rosie. It was a beautiful moment. Let's open it up to the audience for questions. Who has a question?
Good morning, everyone. My name is
Hi.
Michael Aloide. Dave, this is for you. First, before I start, I want to say that you've been like an amazing, distant mentor to me. I use your opening monologue in Nightingale from our day. Read everything you write, watch everything you do. Thank you. Not only is your voice important in front of the camera, but behind the camera. And I want to know what other projects in the future do you see yourself producing, and what stories do you want to be told that aren't being told now?
Well, firstly, I can tell from your name that you're Nigerian and that you're Yoruba. So I say, hello, my brother. So now that we've got that out of the way. Yeah, I mean, for me, a big thrust is to basically contextualize what it is to be a person of color on planet Earth. I mean, that's a thing, a prerequisite I've set for myself because, you know, I've talked earlier about how powerful I believe film to be as a medium in terms of how it shapes culture, how it shapes our view of the world. And if you have a medium as pervasive as film that is misrepresenting people of color, misrepresenting women, and misrepresenting how many of those people should also be behind the camera, then I think that it's going to affect culture in a negative way. I think some of the prejudice we're seeing in the world, some of the lack of understanding we're seeing in the world is to do with the fact that we don't have enough images that show us our world in a truthful way. And so for me, playing Sherwin in 5 Nights in Maine is part of that, you know, to see a black man at the center of a narrative, married to a white woman who has to deal with his mother-in-law, who he's estranged from, and race isn't the absolute kernel of what it's about. That's reflective of the world we actually live in. And I think that that imbues empathy, it imbues understanding, it imbues an ability to not see someone who's a different color to you as so different to you that you come towards them with fear, a lack of knowledge, or prejudice. So, you know, so that's something that's very important to me and, you know, governs some of the choices I make, but also to have different people behind the camera, directors, writers, producers, because we all go to the movies to see ourselves. I truly believe that. And, you know, we are not all white, male, good-looking men. And so if that's what we mostly see on film, don't feel uncomfortable. Don't feel uncomfortable. You are all three,
No,
by the way.
I don't
You're
feel
a very beautiful man.
I felt complimented.
Let's just call a spade a spade. But
Sticking with handsome, thank you.
Yeah. No, very, very handsome. But you know, we need to see different voices. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I don't know, and I really mean this. I don't know that a man would write 5 Nights in Maine, and certainly not in the way that Maris has written it. And I think that a female voice brings its own flavor, brings its own specificity. I know that in working with Ava DuVernay on Selma, that film would be I think it would be a more political, maybe more intellectual, cerebral film than bringing in the women, bringing in the emotional life of Dr. King. So I love the fact that a woman got to direct that film. So I think that we really are robbing ourselves of the richness of humanity by marginalizing those who are behind the camera as well as in front, because we're all the poorer for it.
Absolutely. Next question.
Hey everyone, did you do anything when you got home or on set to lighten the mood?
Well, luckily, I mean, Rosie and David and Diane are hilarious. And so, yes, it was important that we had a set where we could go deep and do this work. But we also laughed a lot. It was a very intimate kind of familial, like family setting, and we laughed.
I think we have time for one more question right here.
Hey all, the trailer definitely packs an emotional punch. This question's open to all three of you. Because dealing with loss is often very difficult for many people, whether it be family or a loss of a loved one, what do you want people to walk away getting out of this movie?
I'll go first. The freedom to grieve the way your heart and your soul wants to, not the way the world tells you to. Because when I initially was grieving the death of my aunt, who was like my mom, I didn't know how to. I thought I was supposed to be overly dramatic and Puerto Rican, you know, I feel bad, you know, but inside really it was
I want to see that movie,
but you know, it took me a minute to figure out that the way I really wanted to grieve was very quiet. And so I just hope that this film gives license to that freedom.
And I think also leaving the theaters talking to the person next to you, talking to the person that you came with, and sharing those experiences. Because I think throughout the process of making the film and throughout the process of sharing it with an audience, I've been overwhelmed with people sharing their stories with me, and also watching people in the audience like leaving, talking about things maybe they've never shared with somebody quite close to them.
And I hope when people see the film, they'll see bits of themselves in the film, be able to relate to or understand, and not just my character, but Dan's character and Rosie's character. There are shards of humanity in each and every one of those characters that I think can be related to, and ultimately that's what I hope, is that people see some of themselves.
Guys, when can people see the film? How can people see the movie?
August 5th, it will be in New York, LA, plus 10 cities, and it's day and date, so it will also be on cable VOD and iTunes.
Awesome. Congratulations on the film, guys. 5 Nights in Maine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.